Thanks, Morgan, and good morning, everybody. It's really great to be here. I've heard a lot about Tech Forum over the last couple of years, and colleagues of ours that have been here and have sort of come back to Vancouver and talked to us about it, and it's really fun to be here and have a chance to see it firsthand. So I think maybe I'll just start with a little bit of backstory. As Morgan mentioned, we've been working on some national market studies the last couple of years. Our team has done 3 of them. 2 of those on book retail and book distribution were done for Canadian Heritage. And last year we did a 3rd one for the National Library on digital books. And each of these studies really had 2 major components or 2 major phases of work. One was basically a nationwide scavenger hunt, looking around for good data from published sources, from proprietary sources, some original stuff that we pulled together ourselves. And we also did a fairly extensive interview panel with folks in the industry across the country, in the U.S., in some foreign markets as well. And so we feel like in each case we ended up with a pretty comprehensive picture of each of these different aspects of the book market. And certainly each project, just the process of putting these things together, was certainly a really fascinating window into the business. So what I'd like to do in the time that we have today is just sort of pull a couple of big picture ideas out of these studies that we can kick around a bit. And I'm going to lean on the distribution study in particular because Morgan asked me to, like Steve. We all had our marching orders. So I've got a couple of points about how I think book distribution is changing, what's really sort of acting on distribution in Canada in particular. We'll take a look at how some of those changes relate to the digital marketplace and to distribution of digital editions, and then see if we can sort of wrap up by looking ahead a little bit and thinking about what that means for the supply chain going forward. So what's changing in book distribution, or maybe even better, where's change coming from? What are the factors that are really acting on the distribution channel? And the thing that we came back to time and again was just how significant economies of scale are in book distribution, and how they continue to shape the marketplace. The basic idea here goes like this: the modern supply chain generally requires pretty heavy investments in facilities and systems and in technology. And if you're a distributor, you want to put that investment fully to work by spreading those costs over the largest possible sales volume and the largest possible selection of saleable titles. So economies of scale are a critical aspect of efficiency for distributors. They're a way to drive sales growth. They're a way to push costs out of those systems. And so they're also a major contributor to profitability. This is, but the thing that really interests us is how this drive to that kind of efficiency, this drive to economies of scale, shapes the book trade. And for one, it often encourages different kinds of centralization throughout the supply chain. It rewards those that can gather together large numbers of titles, that can invest in systems, that can move inventory around the fastest, the most efficiently, and that can operate at the lowest costs. And so in this way, that sort of drive to scale also encourages an environment that favors larger competitors. So we see this at retail in Canada and elsewhere, of course. This is a little slide from our book retail project, which is just mapping out sales of trade books in Canada across the usual sales channels. That 44% that you see ascribed to the chain is essentially describing the market share of Chapter's Indigo in Canada. And now that's trade books across all of Canada, so English and French markets. If we take, and of course, Indigo's business is primarily in English Canada. If we take out French Canada, the share of market for the chain is approaching 2/3 of trade sales, of consumer book sales in the country, right? So that's scale, and that's a type of market concentration that in turn favors large distributors and other vendors, right? Or there's the geography of the book supply chain in English Canada. right? Most of the English markets, we spent weeks working. Talk about the value of design. So, you know, it just happens that that most of the English market's book inventory is aggregated in and around the GTA, right, and shipped out from there, east and west. Right. So that's a type of scale economy too. You aggregate all of that inventory together, and you distribute it in that sense as sufficiently as you can. But the downside of all this is that large centralized systems like we have in the trade are not always good at dealing with granularity in the marketplace. And here's just a single example. When we were doing our interview panel, we talked to one publisher in BC who runs into this issue all the time. Indigo operates a distribution center, with the idea of more efficiently managing inventory among its stores. That distribution center is here in the GTA. And under this model, publishers are not normally allowed to ship direct to individual stores. Orders go to the distribution center where they can be broken down, sorted, and reconstituted for more efficient shipping out to individual stores across the country. So, but if let's say you're a publisher in BC, and let's say it's the weeks running up to Christmas, and you've got a local store in Vancouver that's brought out one of your very hot titles for that season. Well, you need to resupply that order, but you're not permitted to ship directly. So you ship your reorder back to the DC, which then gets turned around and eventually sent back out to the store in Vancouver. And so, instead of resupplying that local store in a couple of hours out of car stock or whatever else, as publishers might have done in the past, you're into a distribution chain that takes more time to move those books back and forth across the country at greater expense, and you've probably left some sales on the table in the process. Right? So this, admittedly, that's an extreme example, but it's a telling example. And it makes the point that economies of scale, in the way that I'm talking about them here, are pretty hard to achieve reliably in a market like Canada, where you've got a pretty small population spread over a pretty large geographic area. Right? And this example also points us to the problem of a national wholesaler in Canada, and that is there isn't a national wholesaler in Canada. In other markets, notably in the US, the large national wholesalers play a really important role in terms of that type of resupply and in moving inventory efficiently around through the supply chain. That we don't have that sort of player in Canada underscores the fact that the economies are probably not there for that kind of business here. Now, the related point I wanted to pick up is that book inventories are being managed much more tightly across the supply chain nowadays. Retailers demand just-in-time inventory. Distributors do not want to carry excess stock. They're pushing that stock back to the publisher, or they're charging them carrying fees for overage. The consumer who demands everything exactly when, where, and how they want it is at the top of the food chain for sure. So publishers print to the immediate needs, the immediate orders that they have. They remainder or they pulp unsold books much more quickly. And what this means is that the drive to better efficiencies at retail and in the distribution channels are putting additional pressure on the economies of scale available to publishers. Most publishers are printing smaller print runs nowadays than they were even a few years ago. And as I say, they're writing off inventory more quickly. Average unit sales per title are falling as well. And in other words, publishers are struggling for economies of scale at a time when the market is increasingly valuing that type of efficiency. So, what does that mean? That means, well, if you're a small publisher, it means a couple of things. It means you're more expensive to serve. Smaller sales volume is more expensive for a distributor to serve. And that means that distribution is going to be more expensive for you. And that means that you may have more limited choices of distributors. It also means that smaller firms are increasingly going to find value in collaboration. Basically, in manufacturing, a manufacturing economy of scale by bringing together their inventories and their sales volumes. And we've got a couple of examples of this in Canada nowadays. The distributor Fraser Direct gives us a couple of really good examples. Fraser operates the Jaguar Book Group, which is a group of more than 30 small to mid-sized publishers in Canada, with annual revenues of between $500,000 and $1 million each. And so that group model allows those smaller firms to acquire some additional efficiency in their distribution. Right? It's basically what's happening is through the Jaguar Book Group, a lot of the back office services of distribution, invoicing, collections, order processing, even shipments are aggregated under the Jaguar name. Right? Fraser has another model like this in that it acts as the fulfillment house for Lit Disco, the Literary Press Group Distribution Collective, which is a group of even smaller presses, of about 35 literary presses here in Canada. And again, Fraser handles all of the back-end services for that group on behalf of Lit Disco, and works with the collective on different areas of common interest. And the end result is that those small firms are able to get access to a good distribution channel and access to distribution services at a better cost certainly than they would individually. So collaboration is an important strategy for smaller publishers. For larger firms, meanwhile, the drive to scale that we're talking about, then there's an example of repurposing some excellent work earlier. For larger firms, meanwhile, the drive to scale that we're talking about can provide a really compelling rationale for stitching together the U.S. and Canadian supply chains. And we see some interesting indicators of this in the marketplace now. Two of the largest publishers and distributors operating in Canada now rely heavily on warehouses of their international parent companies for Canadian fulfillment. So Random House Canada ships to Canadian accounts from a distribution center in Maryland. Simon & Schuster closed its Canadian warehouse operations in 2004. And moving to a system of consolidated shipments from their distribution centers in Pennsylvania and New Jersey. And since we filed this study early last year, Hachette Book Group, of course, has redrawn its distribution in Canada, and we see other indicators of publishers in Canada sort of linking those Canadian and U.S. supply chains. And this makes a lot of sense when you think about it. I mean, it's not a way we're used to thinking about supply in Canada, and it's in a way it's natural to feel a bit uneasy about it. But it does make a lot of sense. It avoids duplication in systems costs between the two countries. It taps. Oh, Morgan tells me to stay close to the mic. Sorry. I'll start again. Thank you. This makes a lot of sense when you think about it. It avoids duplication in systems costs. It taps the Canadian subsidiary, the Canadian firm, into the considerable economies of scale that are present in those large distribution centers in the States. I mean, these distribution operations are vastly larger than anything that we have here in Canada. Millions of square feet, tens of thousands of accounts served, millions of units shipped. And it's that's a level of scale that we can't touch here in Canada. And this approach also provides access to a much larger selection of in-stock titles. And this is another sort of recurring aspect of scale that we find in our work. Most distributors will establish minimum sales levels to justify keeping a title in the warehouse for immediate shipment. And in the smaller Canadian market, this necessarily means a more limited selection of in-stock titles. So by tapping those larger distribution systems in the U.S., there's a much larger ready inventory of stock that can be shipped immediately. Finally, if you're a Canadian wholesaler, the way that the market gravitates to scale means that your business is under serious pressure from large competitors in the U.S. Every bookstore in the country now has very capable inventory management and ordering tools that allow them to quickly and easily source and price books from different vendors in the U.S. and Canada. especially in periods where the US and the Canadian dollars are trading close in value to one another, as was the case over the last year or so. There's a lot of efficiency for Canadian accounts in ordering out of the US. We have Ingram on the graph here as well with their 4 distribution centers and their sort of north-south shipping patterns into Canada. They're a private company, of course. They don't report their sales, but there's every indication that their sales into Canada have grown dramatically over the last few years. They're really good at what they do, and no Canadian competitors can match the title selection, the systems investment, the pricing, and the performance that they have, right? And this was one of our study respondents during the distribution study commenting on this very thing. So the point to be made here is that the drive to economies of scale that is generally present in the market is one of the effects of that is it is encouraging some of that north-south integration and more overlap between U.S. and Canadian supply chains than we may have seen in the past. So I've been talking about print books and print distribution up to this point. Now, how does this all apply to digital? I'm starting on print because we really do see a lot of parallels between print distribution and distribution of digital editions, especially when it comes to the question of scale. Like print distributors, digital distributors or digital service firms have to make a significant fixed investment. Not so much in warehouses, but in technology and in systems for sure. And those large systems investments create the same kind of drive to economies of scale that is true in the print world. And the issue of title selection and the breadth of title selection is present, of course, in the digital marketplace as well. Sales platforms and content aggregators of different kinds are racing to build the largest possible digital catalogs that they can. So if you're Amazon, for example, you'd rather deal with a publisher that can move thousands of titles onto your platform than with 20 or 30 smaller publishers that have even combined a smaller collection of titles to bring into the channel. Right? So, as in print, digital sales channels are often heavily influenced by also heavily influenced by major gatekeepers that have a great influence over what content is in the channel or on that platform and how it's handled. The different digital service providers that are emerging in the marketplace are sort of one level of gatekeeper in that respect. If you're a publisher, can you afford those services? Can you work effectively with those service providers as an individual firm? And then major sales channels or major platforms for content like Amazon or Google are another level of gatekeeper as well. So in the digital marketplace we have today, this often means more limited access to some of these major platforms for smaller players. But also, as in print distribution, we see that smaller firms can get better access and better terms by collaborating to buy digitization and digital distribution services as a group. Okay. So we're close to time, I think. Yeah? Yes. Oh, yeah, we are. So I think we'll just a few thoughts to finish up on how the supply chain might develop in the future. We spent a lot of time in our practice trying to how markets work and how the book market in particular is going to respond to some of the social and technological change that is acting on it now. And of course, the internet is the engine of that change and everything that revolves around it. So for publishers, the web opens up opportunities for a more direct relationship with readers and for new types of collaboration. For consumers, the web means more choice than at any other time in history. And this is a great time to be a consumer, right? For all the reasons that Steve was describing to us earlier. However, in the digital marketplace, we're not free of the problem that troubles most cultural markets. And that's the challenge of encouraging a truly diverse marketplace. The long tail is real, of course. Direct-to-consumer is real. But in the face of unlimited selection, filters continue to play a really important role in digital markets and digital sales channels. And the major gatekeepers in the supply chain, some of these major platforms, the Amazons, the Googles, all the usual suspects, are still the most important filters for consumers, and obviously really critical platforms for delivering that content to consumers. And that said, we think consumers are going to continue to find new ways to exercise the increased influence that they have in the market today. We think that means we're heading for a more fragmented marketplace, the sort of broader and deeper consumer taste that Steve described earlier rings really true to me. And we're already seeing that readers are more than willing to step around the traditional book system and those mainstream channels, whether in print or in digital. We can already see plenty of examples of change in this respect that is being driven outside of the mainstream book business, whether that's self-publishing. I don't know, you know, in our experience, a lot of times when we're working within the publishing business proper, people don't pay a great deal of attention to what's going on, like with the Lulus of the world, or what's going on in the used book market. And I think that, you know, the numbers that Steve put up earlier are really compelling. I mean, you know, they're drawing hundreds of thousands. Just Lulu.com alone is a self-publishing service. Hundreds of thousands of unique visitors every month. You know, an amazing volume of title output, right? We're not used to thinking about that as part of the book market proper, but increasingly it is, right? And that's where a lot of that change is being driven, is through those types of platforms or through new models of plasticity in the way that Steve described them earlier, different ways of mashing up content and producing custom content that's just for me, right? So that's, you know, that type of fragmentation I think is here and is increasing for all of us. From the publisher's perspective, we think the future is going to be marked by a lot more collaboration and collective action, both in sales and marketing and also in distribution. And you know, in our practice, we're working on some really cool stuff in terms of collective marketing opportunities for Canadian publishers, and we're really excited about that as a direction for the industry. We think also that you know, the type of change that we see in the marketplace is driving publishers towards more agile publishing models, whether that means XML workflow or you know, more varied and custom publishing operations. And we also think that this is leading us to greater efforts on the part of publishers to connect directly, greater efforts and greater opportunity for publishers to connect directly with readers and to encourage reader communities. So the pursuit of economies of scale has been, and it continues to be, the key building block of a more efficient book business. We think that's going to continue. But the web gives publishers and distributors of all sizes the new ways to scale their distribution and new ways to compete, you know, and new ways to more efficiently serve niche audiences. So so for us, you know, those are all exciting directions, and I think you know, in particular, that notion of connecting directly with readers and collaborating for more effective distribution, more effective sales and marketing platforms are the really compelling opportunities that are in front of the industry today. And I think with that, I've had the 5-minute sign, the 2-minute sign. I think I'm going to pack it in. Thanks very much.